Okay, we are back and we're going to be talking now about the topic of confrontation, which is what we discussed or read about in our Ivy text this week. Now, I'm going to admit that when I started my schooling for counseling, a lot of these micro skills were things that I really struggled with. It really caused me to take a look at what I valued and what I thought was important and how I did things. Confrontation was one of them. I grew up in the church, I think as I've shared with y'all, and I grew up in an environment that really viewed confrontation in a way that was almost spiritual, that you needed to do this. You needed to confront people on their sin issues, on their behavior, on their talk, on their thoughts. Anytime that you thought it was not in line with the Bible or what the church said was appropriate. And so I really had this view of confrontation as almost a harsh thing, but I was really good at it. I was in a position of leadership within my church. I was a youth director. I had many students and adults underneath me who looked to me for direction. And in that, there was an element of confrontation that I was readily supposed to give and really kind of challenging people on what they were saying and what they were doing. And at the time, I really relished it. It was a little bit of a power trip in me being right. But when I started school, about halfway into my program, I read a book, and it actually wasn't for school at all. It was, I forget who it was by and what it was even called, but it was talking about relationships, and it brought up the topic of confronting somebody who had maybe done something to you, or who maybe really did have a sour attitude, or was doing something that was not right. It talked about confrontation and how do you confront somebody in a loving way, because that was always something I wanted to do was to confront in a loving way. I never wanted it to be shaming, although I also didn't mind being right either. And so in this book, the topic of confrontation was addressed, and it really shifted my view of what confrontation actually was. And she said, when you go to confront somebody, if the purpose of your confrontation is for them to really feel bad and for you to feel good about yourself for confronting them and bringing this issue to light, and that they would be essentially shamed to a place of change, she said that's not the right way to confront somebody. But she said the right way to confront somebody is after you've thought about it and considered how they're going to take it, and that you come to them in a humble way, and you also recognize how they might feel in that situation, and to seek to confront them in a loving way that says, I'm here with you, I'm walking with you, my goal is not to shame you or to make you feel bad, but rather I want the best for you. It's a totally different attitude of confrontation. And this author really challenged my view, and since that point, I've become a lot quieter. And I think that that's a good thing. Because what I've started to learn, and what Ivy's text points out, and the more I work with clients, is that confrontation often comes in a quiet moment where I don't really have to say much at all. And the purpose of confrontation is so that somebody's reality would be expanded in a way that they are able to dig deeper into themselves or their own self-awareness or the situation that they're going through, and to seek lasting change through their own values and thoughts and opinions being reshaped, rather than me kind of plowing into them and kind of forcing that change, or that they would change because they feel like they have to in order to meet my standards. And so really confrontation is all about the attitude, and it's not necessarily the attitude of your client. Confrontation is about your attitude when you're doing it. The purpose really is to call somebody into that deeper awareness of the situation and themselves, rather than to prove their wrongness, which on the flip side proves your rightness. That's not what confrontation is about. So Ivy's text talks a little bit about different reasons that you might confront somebody. And I just kind of wanted to highlight a couple of these and maybe give some examples to kind of put this into a greater perspective. So confronting might be something as simple as asking somebody to tell me more about blank, fill in the blank, whatever it is that they're talking about. Oftentimes people will just say things, and they maybe aren't realizing that what they've said is very counter to other things that they've said, or to their actions, or those sorts of things. So when you get them to that place and say, tell me more about this, it invites them to kind of expand their awareness. They'll start talking, and as you have the chance to reflect back to them, they're able to then hear and potentially catch those discrepancies. Another question or train of thought that I might use with clients after tell me about blank would be, well, tell me how that positively or negatively impacts you. What about that is beneficial? What about that is maybe not so beneficial? What we're doing is we're getting them to this place where they're then able to kind of think through, okay, I'm doing this. How does this impact me in a beneficial or non-beneficial way? And the client then is able to make the changes necessary. You might confront when you see or hear of an inconsistency between what they say versus what they do. So the way that you might deal with it, there's inappropriate ways that you might confront that, and then appropriate ways that you might confront that. So an inappropriate way would be, well, why do you do that? Or how come you can't see the difference between what you're doing and what you're saying? What that does is it automatically puts somebody on the defense, because that type of question feels very much like a threat. Like we've got to come up with a right answer. We've got to somehow defend or justify our actions or our thoughts. So that might be an inappropriate way for confrontation. Well, why would you do that? Or I don't see how that would make sense to you. That would be inappropriate. An appropriate way would be much softer. Tell me why you did this. Tell me why you chose this. Last week you said this, so tell me what prompted or motivated you to do differently this week. I apologize for the beeper. I have some muffins. Anyways, that's life, right? So that would be an appropriate way. Or help me understand what you mean by this, or help me understand why this action is important to you. All of those are ways of confrontation that are not slamming the individual, but they are helping them come into that fuller awareness of self. So I'm going to give you some examples, but I'm going to take those muffins out really quickly, and then we'll come back.